never thought much about Airbnb. It seemed like a perfectly reasonable way to find a place to stay while I was traveling, affordable, convenient, and simple. So when I found the listing for the haunted loft in the small town of Marlow, I thought it was just another quirky, themed rental. The description mentioned the place was old but full of charm and perfect for those who like a bit of mystery. It was cheap, and honestly, the name intrigued me. I needed a place to crash for a few nights before an important meeting in the city. So I booked it without hesitation. When I pulled up to the building, it didn't look like much, an old 3-story brick house nestled between two newer, more modern homes. The sign outside said The Haunted Loft, though it was a bit weathered. The windows were dusty and the place had a somewhat run-down feel to it, but not in an ominous way, just neglected. I wasn't expecting luxury. It was a temporary stop and I had no interest in overthinking it. I walked up to the door and rang the bell. After a moment, the door creaked open, and there stood the host. He was a tall man, probably in his late 50s, wearing an old sweater and slacks that looked like they hadn't seen the inside of a laundromat in years. His hair was thin and white, his eyes hollow, and his smile didn't quite reach them, but he welcomed me in without hesitation. "You must be the guest for the night," he said in a gravelly voice that gave me a slight chill. "I'm Harold. Welcome." I shook his hand and gave a half-smile, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling in my stomach. As he led me upstairs to the loft, I noticed the hallway was dim, the air heavy with the scent of must and something else. Something faintly sweet, like old flowers that hadn't been watered in years. When we reached the loft, I was relieved to see that it was just as advertised. Charming, with a large bed in the center and windows that overlooked the town. The wooden floors creaked beneath my feet, and the whole place had an antique feel to it. There was a beautiful old armchair by the window, and a small writing desk tucked in the corner. It looked cozy, comfortable even, but there was something in the air that made me uneasy. "Make yourself at home," Harold said as he left, his voice trailing behind him as he descended the stairs. I locked the door behind him and set down my bag. It was then that I noticed the painting on the wall across from the bed. It was a portrait of a woman. Her eyes were unnervingly lifelike, her expression both sad and severe. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was watching me. I figured it was just the lighting or maybe the fact that I was alone in this strange old place, but it sent a shiver down my spine. I pushed it aside and decided to unpack. As I was hanging up my clothes in the small closet, I heard the faint sound of footsteps above me. At first I assumed it was the creaking of the old house or maybe just my imagination, but then it happened again. Thump, thump, thump. I froze. My heart started to race. I hadn't seen anyone else in the house besides Harold. The footsteps continued, slow and deliberate, moving across the floor above me. My skin prickled, and I felt a cold draft blow through the room, even though all the windows were shut tight. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing thoughts. It was probably just another quirk of the house, something that had settled over time. But the noise grew louder, more insistent, as if someone was pacing above me. I grabbed my phone and texted the host. "Hey, just wanted to ask if there's anyone else in the house. I'm hearing footsteps above me." I waited for a response, but nothing came. The silence stretched on and the footsteps stopped. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just an old building, but my nerves were shot. I grabbed my jacket and went downstairs to find Harold. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, the house felt different, darker, colder. The air smelled stale, and there was an eerie quiet. I knocked on the door to the room where I'd last seen Harold, but there was no answer. I tried the door. It was unlocked. Inside, the room was empty. The bed was perfectly made, the desk undisturbed, but what caught my attention was a small wooden box on the dresser. It wasn't there earlier. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Inside was a small stack of old photographs, black and white images of the house, and in each one the same woman from the portrait was standing in the background. In one photo, she was holding a child by the hand. In another, she was standing alone in front of the house, her expression cold and vacant. A noise behind me made my blood run cold. The door slammed shut, and I turned to see the woman from the painting standing in the doorway. Her eyes were now hollow and her mouth twisted into a horrific smile. She stepped forward and I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat. Before I could react, everything went black. I woke up in the bed of the loft, my body sore and my head pounding. The photographs were gone, and the room looked unchanged. But something had shifted. The air was thick with an oppressive presence, and I knew deep in my gut that I wasn't alone. I packed my things in a frenzy, my hands trembling as I grabbed my bag. I didn't even stop to check out. I just ran. As I left the house, I glanced up at the window of the loft. The woman's eyes were still watching me. I never went back to that place, and I never will, but I know the woman is still there, waiting, and I can't shake the feeling that she's following me. The first night in the old Victorian house didn't seem so bad. It had a certain charm, I suppose, and weathered elegance, the kind of place you might expect to find in a small, sleepy town like Elmsford. I had booked it on Airbnb, a last-minute choice after my business trip ran longer than expected. The photos online made it look quaint. Wooden floors, a spacious kitchen, and a cozy bedroom that looked perfect for a quiet evening to unwind. But as I stepped inside, something felt off. The air was thick, almost sticky, and there was an uncomfortable quiet that filled every corner of the house. I shrugged it off, of course. It was probably just the isolation, the kind of eeriness you only feel in old houses, especially in a place like this. The host, Mrs. Harper, was sweet enough. When she greeted me, her hands trembling ever so slightly as she handed me the keys. "Everything you'll need is inside," she said, her voice soft and almost too calming. "Make yourself at home." She lingered in the doorway a little too long, her eyes darting nervously over my shoulder before she smiled a little too wide and quickly retreated down the path, leaving me alone. I closed the door behind me, feeling the weight of it as it clicked shut. The house seemed to sigh with the motion, the creak of the door echoing through the stillness. My suitcase felt heavier as I dragged it down the hall, past the old grandfather clock that ticked in the living room with an eerie rhythm. I explored the downstairs first. The living room was large, with high ceilings and an old fireplace that seemed to whisper memories of long-gone fires. But as I wandered deeper into the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, not by anything obvious. There were no strange faces in the windows, no creepy paintings on the walls. It was more like the house itself was alive, breathing with me. After settling in, I decided to unwind in the small reading nook by the window. The sun was setting, casting a dim, amber glow across the room. I started scrolling through my phone, trying to focus on work, but something kept drawing my attention to the walls. The silence was too absolute. It wasn't peaceful. It was as though the house was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Then I heard it, a faint sound, almost like a whisper. It came from the wall behind me. I paused, my heart skipping a beat. The noise wasn't loud, more like a quiet scraping sound, a faint rustling like something or someone was trying to move inside the walls. I turned quickly, eyes scanning the surface of the wall. The noise stopped immediately. A chill ran down my spine, and I laughed nervously, trying to convince myself it was just the house settling. But the more I thought about it, the more unnerving it became. I tried to ignore it, returning to my phone, but the feeling of being watched never left. That night I tried to sleep in the bedroom upstairs, but sleep wouldn't come. The walls seemed to groan under the weight of something pressing against them. Then, just as I was drifting off, I heard it again. This time it was clearer, a soft, desperate whisper, barely audible but unmistakable. "Help me." I froze. My body went rigid as I strained to listen. The sound seemed to come from directly behind the wall next to my bed. I got up slowly, my legs unsteady, and approached the wall, pressing my ear against the cool surface. "Please, help me." The whisper was faint, but it was there, pleading. Panic surged through me and my breath quickened. I pulled away from the wall and backed into the corner of the room, eyes darting to the door, the window, anywhere I could run to. I grabbed my phone and texted Mrs. Harper, but the message wouldn't send. The signal was dead. The house seemed to grow colder as I stood there, the silence now deafening. I couldn't stay in the room. Not with that whisper, not with that feeling of something behind the walls begging for help. I grabbed my jacket and went downstairs, trying to steady my breathing, but the whole house seemed to press in on me. Thought about leaving, just walking out into the night and never looking back. But then I heard it, a soft, guttural scraping sound, like nails dragging across wood. It came from directly below me, from the basement. My stomach churned as I tried to move, my legs uncooperative, but the sound grew louder, more frantic. I couldn't stand it anymore. I had to know what was going on. I grabbed the nearest flashlight and made my way toward the basement door, my heart pounding in my chest. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. The smell of damp earth hit me as I descended, the air thick and musty. At the bottom of the stairs, the beam of my flashlight flickered, barely illuminating the room. There were old crates and furniture covered in dusty sheets, but then I saw something that made my blood run cold. Scratches. Long, deep gouges in the wooden floor, as if something had been dragging itself across the ground. And then I heard it, the whisper, louder now, almost frantic. "Get out." I swung the flashlight around, but there was nothing there. Just shadows, just dust. But the whisper, the scraping, it was everywhere. I didn't wait to find out what was causing it. I ran back. Up the stairs, my breath ragged, my body trembling. I bolted out the front door and into the night, not stopping until I reached the town center. I called Mrs. Harper, but her phone went straight to voicemail. I never saw her again. The house was empty when the police arrived the next morning, but they found something in the walls. Old letters, dried blood, and a small decaying body that had been trapped there for years. I never returned to Elmsford, but every now and then I hear it, the faintest scrape behind the walls followed by the same whisper, "Help me." I was never particularly superstitious. Mirrors, reflections, all of that. I used to think it was just the stuff of cheap horror movies, but that was before I moved into the old apartment on Willow Street. I'd been living there for a few weeks, when things started to change. Little things at first. Sounds in the night that I couldn't explain. A light flickering when there was no reason for it. But then the mirror. The mirror changed everything. It was an ordinary mirror, an antique, golden-framed piece hanging on the wall of my bedroom when I moved in. The landlord hadn't said much about it. In fact, she barely said anything at all. I signed the lease, gave her the rent, and she handed me the keys without a word. The apartment was in a quiet, somewhat forgotten part of the city, tucked between two older buildings, not much foot traffic, not much noise. It seemed like the perfect place to escape after a long, stressful few months. The first few days were peaceful, almost too peaceful. I set up my things, unpacked my boxes, and tried to settle in. But there was always something just a little off. The building creaked at night. The neighbors were silent, never seen or heard. It felt like I was the only person living there. Then came the mirror. It was placed directly across from my bed, which, in retrospect, was a terrible choice. Every time I woke up in the middle of the night, my eyes would drift toward it. At first, I didn't think anything of it. I was just adjusting to the new place. But after a few nights, I began to notice something strange. It wasn't the reflection of the room that bothered me. No, it was what I saw in the mirror besides my own reflection. The first time it happened, I thought I was imagining it. Just a trick of the light, a shadow, something moving in my peripheral vision. But as I looked closer, I saw it clearly. Eyes. Someone else's eyes. At first, they were faint, just a glimmer of movement in the reflection, as if someone had been standing just out of view. I blinked hard, shook my head, and looked again. Nothing. My reflection stared back at me, unchanged. I told myself it was nothing. I was just tired. But the next night it happened again. Only this time the eyes were clearer, darker, more defined, and they were watching me. I froze, staring at them in the mirror, heart pounding in my chest. The eyes were wide, unnaturally so, as if they were terrified. And then, just as I started to look away, they blinked. I gasped and scrambled out of bed, my head spinning. What the hell was going on? I turned around to check the rest of the room, but nothing was there. I rushed to the door, flicking on the light, hoping that maybe it had been a figment of my imagination. But no, the room was still empty, and the mirror hung silently on the wall. I didn't sleep that night. The next few days, I tried to avoid looking at it. I covered the mirror with a blanket, then a towel, anything to block out whatever was staring back at me. But no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from that reflection. Every time I walked past it, I would catch the corner of my eye, half expecting to see those eyes staring back at me. It started to get worse. One night, I had just finished reading a book in bed when I looked up at the mirror. It was as if the reflection was no longer mine. The room behind me was empty, but the reflection of myself was wrong. My reflection didn't move in sync with me anymore. It lagged as though it was taking a moment to catch up. And then, I saw the eyes again. This time, they were closer. They were so vivid, so distinct, as though someone was standing just behind me. My blood ran cold as the reflection of me in the mirror smiled. I didn't smile. I stumbled back from the mirror, my pulse hammering in my ears, but the reflection kept grinning. I could feel it, a tightness in my chest, a suffocating sense of dread that seemed to press on me from all sides. My reflection wasn't me anymore. It was something else, something wrong. I ran from the room, slamming the door behind me, but the image of that smiling face stayed burned into my mind. I couldn't escape it. I stayed awake that night, staring at the door, half expecting the reflection to come out from behind the glass and take me. The next morning, I went to check the mirror. It was just a mirror. Nothing unusual. No strange eyes, no grin. But I felt different. The air in the room was heavier, colder, like something had shifted. I couldn't bring myself to look at it again. I covered it once more, and this time, I left the apartment for a while. I wandered the streets, trying to clear my head, but the feeling of those eyes haunted me. I never went back to the apartment after that day. I packed up what I could and left. I never contacted the landlord. I never looked back. But sometimes, just sometimes, when I pass a mirror on the street or in a store, I catch a glimpse of someone watching me. The eyes are too familiar, too knowing. And then, just as quickly as it appears, the reflection is gone. And I know, no matter how far I run, that something is still watching me from behind the glass. I have always loved Airbnb. Traveling for work meant I was constantly on the move, and I quickly got used to finding cozy little places that felt like home for a night or two. One evening, while scrolling through my phone for a last-minute booking, I came across an intriguing listing. Secluded forest cabin, perfect for a quiet getaway. The description promised a peaceful retreat, nestled in the woods with no neighbors for miles. It sounded perfect for clearing my head before an important meeting the next day. The price was reasonable, and the photos looked charming, rustic. Wooden interiors, a fireplace, and large windows that framed the forest outside. I didn't hesitate. I booked it for the night. The drive to the cabin was longer than I expected, the road winding deeper into the forest with every mile. The trees became taller, the air thicker, and the world outside felt more and more remote. As I pulled into the gravel driveway, the cabin loomed before me, a large two-story structure with an ancient, weathered charm. It looked like it had been there for ages. But there was something about it that felt off. The wood was cracked in places, the porch sagging under the weight of time. Still, it had an eerie beauty to it. I rang the bell, and moments later, the host opened the door. A woman in her late 40s with gray hair tied back in a loose bun. She smiled warmly as she welcomed me inside. Her name was Evelyn, and her eyes, though kind, seemed distant, almost as if she wasn't fully present in the moment. She offered me tea, explaining that there was no cell service in the area and that I'd need to make use of the cabin's landline in case of emergencies. It's a quiet place, she said, almost as a warning. No distractions, just nature. I smiled and nodded, trying to shake off the odd feeling that had settled in my chest. Maybe it was just the isolation. The house felt empty. It had all the trappings of a cozy retreat, yet there was something about it that made me feel like I wasn't entirely welcome. Evelyn showed me to my room on the second floor. The bed was large and inviting, the sheets freshly pressed. The only thing that caught my attention was a large antique mirror hanging on the wall across from the bed. It was old, tarnished, with ornate gold trim that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. There was something about it, something strange that made my stomach turn, but I dismissed it. Maybe I was just tired. "I'll leave you to settle in," Evelyn said. "Dinner will be ready at 7. If you need anything, don't hesitate to call." I thanked her and sat on the bed, trying to focus on my work, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The cabin creaked in ways that didn't seem normal. I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my door, though when I opened it, the corridor was empty. I tried to brush it off, but the unease kept gnawing at me. At 7 p.m., I made my way downstairs. Evelyn had prepared a simple homemade meal, soup, fresh bread, and a small salad. She was quiet as we ate, as if lost in thought. I tried to make conversation, but she seemed distant, her eyes often flicking to the far corner of the room as if she were listening for something. "Is something wrong?" I asked, unable to hold back my curiosity. Evelyn's face tightened, and for a moment I thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she spoke, her voice low and almost conspiratorial. "There's a story about this cabin," she said. One that no one talks about anymore. People used to come here for a weekend getaway and some of them didn't leave, or they came back changed. People say the cabin has a way of drawing you in. I frowned, my spoon suspended halfway to my mouth. What do you mean? She looked at me, her expression unreadable. Some places are cursed, and this one is no different, but it doesn't show itself right away. It waits. I laughed nervously, trying to brush off the chill creeping down my spine. You're just messing with me. Evelyn didn't smile. I wish I were. After dinner, I went back to my room, determined to shake off the weird conversation. I could hear Evelyn moving about downstairs, humming to herself as I tried to unwind. But as I sat on the edge of the bed, I couldn't ignore the mirror across from me. I stared at it for a long time, watching the reflection of the room as the dim light flickered. Then I saw something. At first, it was just a shadow. It moved, just beyond the edge of the mirror, like a figure standing outside of the frame. My heart skipped a beat, but when I leaned in closer, I saw nothing but my own reflection staring back at me. I must have imagined it, I thought. My eyes were tired, and the house was unsettling. I turned to get into bed, but the air suddenly felt colder, as though the temperature had dropped by several degrees. I turned back to the mirror. This time the shadow was clearer. A figure, tall, dark, and featureless, was standing just behind me, within the reflection. My breath caught in my throat. I spun around, but there was no one there. I stumbled backward, falling onto the bed, my eyes locked on the mirror. The figure in the reflection was still there, and this time, it wasn't standing. It was moving closer to me. I could feel it, like it was reaching out from the glass, its presence growing stronger with every passing second. I screamed and jumped to my feet, knocking the lamp over as I scrambled to the door. But just as I reached for the handle, I heard a voice, a whisper, coming from behind me. A low, rasping sound, almost like a chant. I turned slowly, and there it was again. The figure in the mirror, now standing directly behind me. Its form was clearer than before, and I could see a faint smile forming on its face, something dark and twisted. I had to get out. I had to leave. I didn't care about the reservation, the price. I just needed to escape. As I ran down the stairs, I found Evelyn standing in the hallway. She looked at me with a sad, knowing expression. I told you, she whispered. The cabin has a way of keeping people, and once it has you, it won't let go. I didn't stop to ask her what she meant. I didn't stop for anything. I ran straight out of the cabin and into the night, not looking back. But as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the rearview mirror. I had never really thought much about Airbnb before. To me, it was just a place to crash while traveling, an alternative to hotels. So when I found a cheap, cozy little spot in the middle of nowhere for the weekend, I didn't hesitate. The listing was simple: small, rustic cabin tucked away in the woods. Perfect for a quiet, relaxing getaway. It seemed perfect for a weekend to recharge. The host, an older woman named Eleanor, had only a few reviews, but they were all glowing. Her cabin, they said, was peaceful, idyllic even. When I arrived, the place looked just as promised. Quaint, a little too perfect maybe. The cabin was nestled at the edge of a dense forest, surrounded by towering trees, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. I could smell the fresh scent of pine in the air, and the chirping of birds echoed from the trees. Eleanor greeted me with a warm smile and an awkward handshake, her eyes just a little too wide, but I brushed it off. She showed me around the cabin, pointing out the essentials: a small kitchen, a modest bedroom with a single window overlooking the woods, and a cozy living room with a stone fireplace. It was charming, even if it felt a little too isolated, but I figured that was the point. After all, I was here for some peace and quiet. Make yourself at home, she said, her voice a bit too quiet, almost a whisper. You'll be safe here. No one bothers you in these parts. I nodded, already unpacking my bags. Eleanor seemed harmless, but there was something unsettling about the way she watched me as I settled in. I couldn't quite place it, but I shrugged it off. After all, I'd come here to get away from the stress of the city, not to dwell on oddities. The first night was peaceful, too peaceful, the kind of stillness that hangs heavy in the air, making you aware of every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of wind outside. I lay in bed, staring out the window into the dark forest. The moonlight cast long shadows across the trees, making the woods look even more intimidating. The isolation of the place was starting to weigh on me. but I tried to relax. I was here, to rest, not to overthink. That's when I heard it. A soft, scratching sound like fingernails against wood. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I looked around the room trying to identify the source, but everything seemed still. The sound came again, this time closer. It was coming from the hallway outside my room. I told myself it was just the house settling, the wind making strange noises. But the scratching grew louder, more insistent. I got out of bed, my heart pounding, and slowly opened the door to the hallway. The house was dark, except for the dim light from the bedroom. I crept down the hallway, my footsteps muffled on the wooden floor. At the end of the hallway stood a door, locked, I assumed. It had to be. No one had mentioned another room in the house. The scratching stopped when I reached the door, but then I saw it. A shadow moved under the door as though something or someone was standing just beyond it, waiting. I backed away, my pulse racing. The temperature in the hallway felt colder, the air thick with unease. I stared at the door for what felt like forever before I finally mustered the courage to turn and retreat back to my room. The rest of the night was fitful. I didn't sleep well. Every little sound made me jump. Every creak, every rustle of the trees outside, every whisper of the wind. I kept expecting that scratching sound to return, but it didn't. The next morning, I tried to shake off the feeling of dread. Eleanor seemed unaffected when I mentioned it, almost dismissive. "Houses make noises," she said with a gentle laugh. "It's just the old wood settling. Don't worry about it." But I couldn't let it go. Something wasn't right, and it was starting to feel like I wasn't alone here. That afternoon, I ventured into town to clear my head. I asked around about the cabin and its history, but no one had much to say. It was like the place didn't exist before Eleanor took it over. There was a strange sense of secrecy in the town that made me uncomfortable, but I didn't want to seem paranoid. When I returned to the cabin later that evening, the door to the hallway was wide open. I hadn't left it open. In fact, I hadn't touched it since last night. My heart sank as I stepped into the hallway. The air colder than before, and the scratching sound was back. Louder this time. It was coming from the same door, the one at the end of the hallway. This time I didn't hesitate. I grabbed a chair and wedged it against the door, heart hammering in my chest. The scratching grew frantic, like something was trying to claw its way out. The door rattled, but it held. And then a voice. Soft, just barely audible. A whisper. "Let me out." I bolted from the house, not looking back. I didn't care about the cold air or the darkness, only the overwhelming need to escape. Eleanor didn't stop me as I fled, though her eyes followed me, wide and knowing, as I ran to my car and drove off. I'm safe now, back in the city, but every night, I hear the scratching again. Sometimes, in the silence, I swear I hear that whisper too, faint and desperate. It won't stop. I don't think I'll ever go back to Airbnb again.